to today's Before I Died New Mexico Festival Symposium. This session is all about legal and financial issues related to end of life. And I am so thrilled to have this distinguished panel with us today. Jim Plitz, attorney and partner with Morris Hall, which is an estate planning law firm. Betsy Ehrenberg, the founder and CEO of Legacy Concierge. And Carl Wackerle with National Guardian Life Insurance Company. So I will ask you all to please introduce yourselves and what do you think is most important about your field related to legal and financial issues and end of life?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Plitz. As Gail said, I'm a partner and attorney at Morris Hall, which is an estate planning law firm. I have a couple questions to ask you guys. Who here has some form of estate plan? Good. Better than the national average. More than 60% of Americans do not have an estate plan, the legal documents that give you power over assets or the person. Those who have an estate plan, who's planning with a last will? Last will and testament? How about a revocable trust? Okay, a little less. So, one last question. Who here's gonna die? Right, so it always boggles my mind why 60% of Americans do not have an estate plan. And obviously, you guys care a little more. Care about what happens to you and who you leave behind. The dying part is the easy part, right? The wake you leave, the people you leave behind you is difficult. So my job as an estate planning attorney is to document your wishes. Who do you want to be in charge? Who do you want to get your stuff? And we try to do it in a way that makes it as easy as possible. Dying is not easy, but we want to make it as easy as possible so that way the loved ones you leave behind have more time to focus on you, on your memory, and not have to jump through hoops and all the headaches and hassles. Let the attorneys deal with that kind of stuff.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Betsy Ehrenberg, and I founded Legacy Concierge to remove the electronic footprint of an individual when they pass. And the question might be, what is an electronic footprint? And it is a combination of digital assets and electronic records. Electronic records are things like your driver's license, your passport, your utility bill, your eBay account, your Amazon account. And then the digital assets might be your PayPal account. It could be your emails. It could also be all those photographs that you left on Facebook. It also, if you're a professor at a university and you're writing a book or a thesis, it could be that piece of information. It is any asset that is in digital or electronic form that has value. On average, each one of us has information in 160 locations. And that is staggering. And being the computer geek that I am, I divided them up into 8 categories: email, financial, government, housing, insurance, medical, shopping, and social. And now that I mentioned those 8 categories, your mind is probably spinning and saying, oh my goodness, I do have my name all over the place, all over cyberspace. So my company helps the attorney, helps the administrator of your estate to remove your electronic footprint from cyberspace. And I'll tell you more about that if you have any questions.
Thank you. I have my own microphone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carl Wackerle. I'm Vice President of Individual Life and Annuity Sales at National Guardian Life Insurance Company. We are a mutual company based in Madison, Wisconsin. We've been around since 1910. I've been with the company now for about 18 and a half years. And the reason that what we do is appropriate for this discussion is because one of our specialties is in providing insurance intended primarily and solely, actually, for the funding of end-of-life expenses. We offer a couple of different product options for people to pay for their final expenses. One is pre-need. Has anybody here done a pre-need with a funeral home and pre-arranged and pre-planned? Okay. Good for you. Most people have not done that, as evidenced by the number of hands that went up. But what pre-need is someone who decides, and you know, to your point, Jim, you know, predicting the probability of death is pretty easy. It's not like the weather. The chances are 100%, right? So it is something that you should really do, but you have to get to a point where you're willing to do it. We understand that. But what pre-need is somebody goes down to a funeral home and they sit down with an arranger and they actually pick out what's called goods and services, you know, merchandise and services, whether you want to be cremated, whether you want to be buried, whatever it is you want. And what they do is they write up a contract. It's called a goods and services statement or a pre-funded funeral agreement. And then you do an insurance application that equals that amount. And what happens is that you buy the policy when the time comes and you pass away. The family's going to go down to that funeral home, and the funeral home's already going to know exactly what it is that you wanted to have done. And the really good thing for the family, besides that, which is no easy task to figure out what somebody wants, but the really good thing is the money's there to pay for it. Okay? Because what you don't want to do, I tell people this all the time, what you don't want to leave as your legacy is a funeral bill, right? Nobody wants to be remembered for that. So we sell pre-need. We're probably the second largest seller of pre-need in the United States today. But we also have another product for those of you who don't want to go down to the funeral home and actually plan in advance, but you understand that there is going to be a cost and you don't want to leave a funeral bill as your legacy. Well, we have a product that you can buy and you can set aside up as much money as you want to, and we place that money into a policy. We place that policy into an irrevocable free trust that's designed to pay for end-of-life expenses. And here's the thing about both of those products. They pay the funeral bill within 2 business days without a death certificate. Every other kind of insurance that you have, and I assume all of you have some, needs a death certificate, and the insurance company has up to 30 days to pay that claim. But there's only one problem with that. The funeral home wants to be paid today. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a funeral home and seen a sign that says, payment is due when services are arranged. Not delivered, arranged. Because once they've delivered it, they have no leverage left, do they? So you have to, they're going to ask you in an arrangement conference, how are you going to pay for this today? And it's really nice when a family doesn't have to worry about that. We truly exist to make a really bad day for a family, which is the loss of a loved one, just a little bit easier because finances don't become part of the conversation. It's already taken care of.
Yeah. So what does a good day look like on the worst day of your life from each of your perspectives? What do people do to make the best of that bad day? Or is that too complicated a question?
Well, hopefully they would have planned ahead. I mean,
Right.
that's really the bottom line. You know, the products that Carl's talking about makes it a little easier. Having your wishes known makes it a little easier. Having the conversation throughout life makes it a little easier. If we take all these little steps, that worst day becomes a little easier. The worst day is when I get to sit with the family members and there is no plan, or the plan was poorly executed or acted upon, because now I have to be the bearer of bad news that mom and dad ultimately didn't care enough to put something in place for them. Because when you're planning, you're not planning for yourself mostly, you're planning for those who you leave behind. So a good day is a day that has been laid out already, sometimes years in advance. And it's a bad day when it's not.
Gail, your question isn't fair. Having said that, from an electronic point of view, I think one of the issues is notifying all the people that you wanted to notify. In the olden days, that was making phone calls. And even though many of us have smartphones, that might not be the most efficient way to notify people. So from a digital point of view, having access to the contact list of the decedent might be a good idea to make that day a little less stressful, because you will have been able to notify, or not you, but the successor will then be able to notify whoever you have designated, and make sure that you didn't leave out Uncle Philip in Madison and Cousin Susie in San Diego.
I would echo all of those things. I think I'll go back to what I said earlier about what we do. A good day, it isn't a good day, let's face it. The loss of any loved one is not a good day. All we can try to do is make it just a little less bad, right? And by pre-funding in advance and even pre-planning in advance, which is even better, you've taken a tremendous burden off of the people who survive you. You've made their lives just a little bit easier, which allows them to focus on celebrating your life and remembering the good times, and not caught up in trying to figure out what should we do for a service. What would they have wanted done? How are we going to pay for this? That makes it a really bad day. So by taking that part away, they're able to focus on you, and they're also able to begin the grief journey, and they need to do that. They need to begin that. So I think that's what makes it I guess a better day, Gail, not necessarily a good day.
You know, Betsy, you had mentioned about those, was it 8 areas of digital assets? And I personally know that it's overwhelming because I manage several websites. You've got travel points, you've got social media, and I actually put together a spreadsheet on paper, on an Excel form, of all of that, business accounts and whatnot, the username, the password, if there's a credit card tied to that account that gets billed every month and will continue to get billed unless you tell them this person's dead. And if you don't know, and with Thanksgiving coming up, Thanksgiving Day is the day when I'm not cooking and I sit down and I update all of the passwords and the additions. I have a 4-page legal size spreadsheet of all of these usernames and passwords. Is that a good way to do it, or is there something better?
It is a good way, but there may be something better. And you touched upon 2 different points that I'd like to clarify. A lot of people make a list of all their user logons and all their passwords, and they feel a real sense of comfort. One of the things that you should know is that if you're not going to be here and you give that list to someone else and they use it, they are impersonating you. And it is against the law for another person to impersonate the owner of a logon. There is a way through legal channels to be officially assigned the right to sign on to bank accounts, credit card accounts, but the thought that I have everything organized so that when I die, the successor, the fiduciary, can just impersonate me. That was not always against the law, but as of January 1st, 2018, it is. In the state of New Mexico, it's Senate Bill 60 that was passed, and it's only 15 pages. The other point I want to make about creating a list of accounts, user logons, and passwords is that many people do it for their own benefit. I haven't signed on to eBay in a long time. What was my password? What was my username? So that's good when a person is alive. In most cases, if you want to cancel an account that was accessed electronically when a person is deceased, the custodian of that account does not require the password. So you have to prove that you're authorized. You have to have a death certificate, letters testamentary, to be able to demand from a custodian that they close the account and return the balance in an account. So there are a lot of little details. And my last point is that when you make a list of different accounts, user logons, and passwords, you want to make sure that that list is complete, that it's correct, and that it's current. And Gail does this once a year, but you shouldn't be surprised if yours has some missing information.
Do we have questions? Oh, Corey.
I have 2 Facebook friends. So this is, your presentation, Betsy, just really brought this home to me. 2 Facebook friends that I know have died, and their Facebook pages are still up.
Yep.
And so just questions about that, or your thoughts on that?
What prompted me to actually start this company 4 years ago was that I got a message, wish Carol a happy birthday, and I knew she had died 4 days before. It was so creepy. At the time, I was able to make 8 phone calls, speak to 8 people at Facebook, and they took down Carol's page. So there is a procedure where the successor can demand from Facebook that they take down the page. And if you're really interested, afterwards, I'll give you my contact information and I'll send that information to you. You can look it up online, and our company has had 2 people working full-time since July of 2017, calling up hundreds of agencies and asking them, how do we close an account? Now, from a legal point of view, we're not dealing with money in a bank account or an insurance policy. All that the company does, all that our company does, is to notify the custodian that the records they have on file belong to a deceased person. But in answer to your question, with social media, we have the procedures for the 6 largest social media companies: LinkedIn, Pinterest, Facebook, and I'm going to miss the other 3, but that's okay. And if you want that information, I'll be happy to share it with you.
Yes.
I've been told, I'd like to know the answer to this. I've been told that when a person dies, you are not supposed to cancel their social security number. And now, they say that by doing that, it can be reinstated and someone else can use it. And also, what about to remove a person from the voting roll? The voting roll.
Okay, not canceling Social Security and removing a dead person from the voting rolls.
Voting records, yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
Well, first of all, as far as Social Security is involved, most crematoriums and funeral homes will notify Social Security within a very short period of time. If the person who died was getting benefits, and those benefits were automatically going into a bank account, Social Security Administration will contact the bank and let them know that the bank account belongs to a deceased person, and they will mark it as such.
Is that Social Security number canceled or not? Is the person, each individual has their own Social Security number. I've been told that you're not supposed to remove that.
Well, I don't know who told you, but the funeral home or the crematorium generally notifies Social Security that the account they have on file belongs to a deceased person. Social Security notifies the bank if automatic deposits were going in. And as far as voter registration is usually in the city or county in which the person resided. And there is now a national organization that notifies the states and then the states to the counties that the person they have on file is now deceased. However, before that was put in place, which was only about a year ago, we listed every single county in the state of New Mexico and how you call them and notify them that the person they have on file is deceased and what information they require. They do require either, from memory, it's either a copy of the obituary or a death certificate. They don't need an original. They need a request that you are asking and proof of death, and it must be in a letter, and it can be an email as well. But if you would like that information for all 39 counties, I'm happy to provide it.
And I'd like to relate when my mother died. This has been 9 years ago now. They didn't have a cell or they just had a landline. It took me 3 calls, 3 times, to finally get them to delete their name from the phone book. The 3rd time I was finally successful, but
the story you're sharing is not unusual, and it is because it is such a complicated procedure, and yet, once you know the procedure, it's relatively easy. It is for those reasons that we created an electronic product, an application that would do it for people. But that application is only good because we have the research going on constantly. And if you were to ask me today, how do I get this done, I can give you the procedures today in all 50 states.
On the 3rd time I was successful, but it took a while.
If you ask them the exact way they expect to be asked at the time that you ask them, there's a higher likelihood they will do what you ask.
Yes.
Yeah, at what point in time should someone access your services, and how much do you charge? I mean, I am on my deathbed, okay, and so does my daughter contact you then, or wait until I die? Or do I contact you?
You have to talk to your lawyer.
The answer is exactly that. We, as a company, do not, at this time, sell this service to individuals. We sell it and make it available to attorneys like Jim, and so that all of his clients can not only deal with their digital assets and their electronic records, but they can also follow all of the wishes of the decedent, and that is what an attorney does for you.
Jim, would you talk about the decedent's tax return? Believe it or not, dead people have to pay taxes.
Yeah, there's only 2 things short in life, death and taxes, and death doesn't stop the taxes. Taxes is a broad term, so we have to be careful when we talk about taxes that we know what kind of tax we're talking about. So in death, we always think estate tax. So effectively, New Mexico has no estate tax. On the federal side, effectively, there's no estate tax either, because the federal government in 2018 has over an $11.1 million exemption, meaning you don't pay an estate tax unless you had more than $11 million. Anybody? So it's been effectively wiped out. There is no estate tax. The next kind of a tax could be an inheritance tax. There is no federal inheritance tax. That's the receiver of the money. There's no state inheritance tax either. Now, if you live in a state like New Jersey, my home state, there is a potential inheritance tax. There are nuances and such, but there's only 2, maybe 3 states that have an inheritance tax. So effectively, as New Mexicans, we don't have any estate nor inheritance tax. Now we get into income tax. So income tax is due April 15th in the following year. If you earned enough money in the year you pass, your successor, your personal representative, your trustee, your successor needs to file your personal income tax. Talk to your CPA. Have them talk to your CPA whether it's due or not. Once you pass away, your Social Security number doesn't work anymore. So your estate or your trust needs a new tax identification number. So if you pass away in February and the resolution of the estate, the distribution out to your beneficiaries isn't till December, there's a chance that there's income from February to December in which the estate needs to file an income tax return. So that's something to be aware of. So we file a 1040 as our personal income tax, a 1041 for estate income tax. Estates pay tax at a higher rate. So if you have $600 in income, you have to file a return. So it's just something to be aware of. Now there's no income, so Social Security goes away, pensions go away, but it's your earnings, your interest, your dividends, things like that. The last kind of tax would be a capital gains tax. And here, one of the IRS's nice things, though it does cost you your life to get it, is we get what's called a step-up in cost basis. So capital gains tax is effectively wiped out at a death. Capital gains tax is effectively wiped out at a death. Real simply, if I bought this microphone for $1,000 and then I sold it to Betsy for $10,000, the IRS says, good for you. Jim, you owe me about $1,350 in tax. That's a $9,000 gain times a 15% capital gains tax return, and that's at the minimum. I pass away, and my estate knows that Betsy wants to buy my microphone, makes that same $10,000 transaction. We get what's known as a step-up in cost basis. It's not the $1,000 that I spent to buy the microphone. It's the market value. So now market and cost are equal. There's no gain, no tax. For the married couples in the room, as a community property state, we get a full step-up regardless of who passes away. So all your rental properties, your stocks, your appreciable assets, if you sell it before a death, there's a tax. If you sell it after a death, no tax.
Other questions? So Carl?
Yes.
When people think about getting insurance to pay for end-of-life expenses, do they have to pay for it all at once?
No, they don't. It's a very good question. We probably sell, I would say, about 65% of our policies as a lump sum. You take money you already have in a CD, in a money market, perhaps in a fully paid up life insurance policy that you can exchange. That's something the IRS allows. You could exchange into our policy. You don't have to use new money to do that. You just take an asset that you have over here and you move it over to us, okay? But we also have the ability to pay for those policies over time. You can pay for them over 3, 5, 7, or 10 years. So about 35%, 33 to 35% of our business is done over time. But again, the bulk of the business is sold in a lump sum. And part of the reason for that is because the average age that we issue insurance at, which most people in the insurance industry think is insane, is 75 years old. Because that is the age that people on average decide, I should probably do something about this. I don't want to leave this to my kids. But you have to age to that point. And we know what the triggers are to get people to actually buy a pre-need or do the trust product that we have. They either have to age to a certain point, okay, where they realize that there is an expiration date on them, all right? They've started to lose people in their circle, so it brings mortality up, front and center. Or they themselves have been diagnosed with something that also brings mortality into the forefront. And at that age, the people have the money set aside, it's sitting there. They know they're not going to need it for pretty much any other reason, so they move it into us. Where we sell the time pay, the 3, 5, 7, or 10 years, are for people who are a little bit younger. And when I say a little bit younger, I mean people in their late 60s, okay? Those are people who are, see, the people who come in at 75 basically come in on their own. You all just got to a point one day you woke up and said, today'd be a good day to go down to the funeral home and pre-plan. I don't know what that day is like, but that must be what happens. But so people go down there and they do that. The people who do it over time and are in their 60s, that's because the funeral home itself reached out to them through advertising and marketing and got them to come to a seminar where they talked about this and got them interested. Okay, and that's how you get the age down. That's how you tend to get people that do time pay, because they don't want to use up assets that they've built up because they're not sure that they may still need them at some point. One of the major fears of older adults, right, is outliving your money. So you're not going to want to let go of it until you're pretty sure you're not going to need it. Well, you don't get to that point until you tend to be 75 on up. We have a lot of funeral homes throughout the United States. Their average age of issue is 80 years old. Wow. So when I tell people what we do for a living, they kind of look at me a little bit askew, because I'll tell them that we sell small face amount life insurance policies to old people for a short period of time. And I always think that if I was at Harvard Business School and I wrote a paper that said this is what I want to do, I would get an F. But that is what we do because there's a real need for it. I don't care, we don't care what means of disposition anybody chooses. You can be cremated, which now is over 50% of all deaths in America. Back in the 1960s, cremation was 1% of the business. Today, cremation is in excess of 50%. Here in Albuquerque itself, it runs between 75 and 78%. It's interesting that the United States is nothing if not geographically diverse. And so in the Midwest, it is around 50%. As you move further east, it goes down. But as you go further west, the cremation rate goes up. Nevada is 79% cremation. Washington State is in the 70s. So it's interesting about that. But we don't care about that at all. What we care is that people actually go ahead and pre-plan and pre-fund so that they save their families a lot of angst when that day comes. That's the important part. It doesn't matter if you're cremated, if you're buried in the ground, if you're interred in a mausoleum. None of that really matters. You know what does matter, though? Is that people have a way to say goodbye to you. Okay? People can't begin their grief journey, and everybody has to have a grief journey, right? If they cared about you at all, they have to have that. But you have to give them the opportunity to begin that journey. And if you don't have some type of memorial service, some type of celebration of life, they can't do that. So I have a very good funeral home friend in Southern California, and he runs over 70% cremation. He's out in what's called the Inland Empire. He's out in Sun City, California, and I asked him once, I said, when people come in and they say, I just want to be cremated, that is a very common refrain you'll hear from someone who comes in a funeral home to make arrangements, right, at 75 or 80. I just want to be cremated. And I said, what do you say to that? And he said, I congratulate them on making a decision. They could have been placed in a mausoleum, they could have been interred in the ground, they could have been cremated. They've chosen cremation. He says, congratulations on reaching that decision. Now, let me ask you this. How are your friends and family going to say goodbye? Would you like a service here at the funeral home? Would you like it at the church? Maybe you were thinking your country club, your social club, whatever. And then he shuts up and doesn't say a word, which is very hard for him. It's hard for me. But he does that. And you know what the response is almost every time? I didn't think you could do that if you got cremated. You can do anything you want. The cremation is just a means of disposition. Keep that in mind. But please, when you're doing this planning, and most of you haven't done it from the raising of hands, I see that, and you're not unique there, so don't feel bad. But when you do it, think about the people you're leaving behind. They need you to plan for something, okay? So set money aside so that there is some money there to do some celebration of life. That's my stump speech.
And that can also apply to things like, well, you got to get the food. I can tell you about catering and over-counting. Food and booze, and what about airplane tickets to fly the kids in from across the country, and hotel rooms or whatever. There are a lot of expenses that add up when you're having a party, and it's the party no one wants to plan. But when you do have a party, there are expenses involved. Do you have another question? Or shall we do some closing? Betsy, do you want to talk a little bit more about social media or our online lives that, you really think people ought to take away?
Absolutely, thank you. It was an interesting question that was asked earlier about this from the woman about who do I tell that I could have built an electronic vault with all this information. And I really wanted to stress why we like to work with the attorney, because when one is thinking about the electronic footprint, at that point, they're also realizing there are so many other details about their wishes at time of death. And at this point, we believe the attorney, knowing about legislation that allows the fiduciary to handle digital assets the same way they treated tangible assets, it is the attorney who understands the nuances. And the last thing that should happen is all these leftover places like this other woman was talking about, the Facebook account, the LinkedIn account. One of our clients it wasn't our client, it was a client of the law firm, came up and said, I have gotten 19 letters requesting donations to my mother who has passed. How can I stop that? And that prompted the company to make up an entire library of how do you notify nonprofits that the member they have on file is deceased. And we came up with one procedure that worked for 18 of the 19, with a very standard letter, a copy of the death certificate, and the request, and the proof that we had the authority. There was only one organization that was different, and that was AARP. And the reason is they kept all their records with date of birth, and they couldn't find the record of the decedent without us providing the date of birth. Everybody else was taken care of.
Wow. Jim, what last thoughts would you like to leave us with?
Well, this room is a little different than most rooms because most people haven't planned. And the most common thing is why? Because I have nothing to plan for. But ultimately, everyone has something to plan for, and your estate plan just has to meet your particular goals. If you're Bill Gates, you have a certain set of plans. If you're the guy standing on the corner at I-25, you need a different set of plan. And everywhere in between, so your plan has to be in place. But because everyone, or at least a vast majority of you guys, have a plan, you don't want it to go static. We encourage our clients to see us every 3 years. We want to sit down and make sure that their plan still works for them. Life is fluid. Laws are fluid. We want to make sure what you put down 3 years ago still works. We get to that bad time when we have a plan in place and the kids come in and say, Mom and Dad have this great plan. It should work, right? And then I have to say no because they didn't see me for the last 18 years. There's many times when I sit down in that review and find that Uncle Bob was getting $10,000. And the client sitting across from me says, no, he shouldn't. I'm like, I'm not telling you whether he should or shouldn't. I'm saying what's in your plan. It gives it an opportunity to change. So if you haven't had your plan reviewed 3 years, 5 years, highly encourage, have it reviewed. Make sure it still works for you the way you thought it did back when you put it in place.
Last words, Carl.
I would like to congratulate all of you who raised your hand and said you had an estate plan. But the interesting thing is that when we asked how many of you have pre-planned, not the same number of hands went up. It's quite a difference. So I would encourage all of you, as part of your plan, your estate plan, you make sure that you take care of end of life as part of that. That would be my parting thought, is make sure your plan doesn't have a hole in it. Because right now, for the majority of you, it kind of does have a hole in it. You should fill that in. Okay? And you can do it however you want to do it. If you want to go to French's, you want to go to Daniel's, you want to go to Riverside, if you want to go the funeral home route, that's fine. Part of the reason it's fine is because they sell NGL products there. But if you don't want to do that and you just want to set aside the money and put it in a trust, you can do that through a financial planner. Okay? But do something, because your family needs you to do it. And one thing I just want to make a little plug for, if I could, Gail, we recently entered into a partnership with Ancestry.com, and they are providing a free website called We Remember. It's called WeRemember.com. And it is the opportunity for people to build their own website, their own, almost like an obituary, but not exactly an obituary. But you can build your own website that tells your life story. And you can put out there anything you want, as much as you want. So speaking of digital assets. Yeah. But these are ones that people actually want to live on. And it's through Ancestry. There's no charge for it. So if you're interested at all, just go to WeRemember.com on the web and check it out. It's absolutely free, and it's something that we're providing to folks. So check it out.
All right. And did you have any further closing? So let's have a big round of applause for our panel on financial and legal issues.